What does a country do when it's offered $100 billion? It's the kind of deal that could define a nation's industry for a generation, a golden ticket to economic revival and military strength. Most governments would sign the papers before the ink was even dry. But Canada did something different. In a move that sent shockwaves through the global defense and industrial sectors, Ottawa didn't just accept the offer. It made a counter-demand so bold, so audacious, it could either forge a new economic future for the nation or shatter the biggest deal in its history, leaving it more vulnerable than ever. This is the story of how a submarine contract became an unprecedented power play, a high-stakes geopolitical game that has everyone asking, did Canada just change the rules, or did it just make the biggest mistake in its modern history? For decades, the standard knock on Canadian defense procurement was that it was, well, a little quaint. Canada was seen as the polite Boy Scout of the international arms market, paying top dollar for off-the-shelf gear from its allies and hoping for a few jobs to be sprinkled into the contract as a thank you. But in the winter of 2026, something fundamentally changed. The Canada that sat across the table from South Korea was not the passive buyer of the past. It was a Canada that finally understood the immense value of its own stability in a world on fire. The news cycle will tell you this is just about buying submarines. But if you see this only as a military purchase, you're missing the profound shift in national strategy that's unfolding right now. Ottawa essentially told the world's industrial giants, the contract is not the prize. The contract is the leverage. To really get the scale of this moment, you have to go beneath the surface, literally. Canada is a maritime nation, but it's a nation with a unique and massive challenge. It isn't an island, and it doesn't have a simple coastline. It's a three-ocean nation, bordered by the vast Pacific, the strategic Atlantic, and the increasingly contested Arctic. Protecting these immense maritime highways isn't just a policy choice. It's the fundamental definition of Canadian sovereignty. And for decades, the primary tool for asserting that sovereignty underwater has been its fleet of submarines. The problem? That fleet is on the verge of total collapse. The Royal Canadian Navy currently operates, on paper, 4 Victoria-class submarines. These boats weren't built for Canada. They were purchased second-hand from the United Kingdom back in 1998 and were already well into their service lives. Today, their age is showing in catastrophic ways. The fleet has been crippled by constant maintenance issues and a simple lack of availability. According to Canada's top naval commander, Vice Admiral Angus Topshee, the country is currently unable to meet its duties to patrol its 3 oceans because of the state of the submarine fleet. On any given day, Canada is lucky if even one of its 4 submarines is fully operational and ready for a mission. Think about that for a second. A G7 nation, with the longest coastline in the world, often has just a single, aging submarine to patrol an area that is almost incomprehensibly vast. This isn't just a military capability gap, it's a gaping wound in the nation's sovereignty. The Arctic, once a frozen barrier, is now opening up due to climate change, attracting foreign naval activity. Defense planners see submarines as one of the few assets able to conduct discreet surveillance and deterrence in those critical waters. Without a credible undersea presence, Canada is effectively blind in its own backyard. This is the backdrop for the Canadian Patrol Submarine Project, or CPSP. This isn't just about replacing a few old boats, it's a strategic reset. The plan calls for up to 12 modern, conventionally powered submarines, a fleet size designed to guarantee a constant presence on all 3 coasts, not just an occasional one. The price tag is staggering. While the initial purchase is huge, when you factor in more than 3 decades of maintenance, upgrades, and support, the total value of the project will exceed $100 billion. This would make it the single biggest military procurement in Canadian history. With a prize that large, the world's best shipbuilders took notice. The competition was fierce, but by late 2025, Ottawa had narrowed the field to 2 finalists. In one corner, the German industrial titan ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems, or TKMS. a legacy builder from a NATO partner. In the other, a powerhouse consortium from South Korea, led by Hanwha Ocean. On paper, it was a classic procurement battle. Two advanced submarine designs being weighed against each other. The Germans offered their proven 212 CD model. The Koreans offered their state-of-the-art KSS-3, a vessel already in service with their navy. But this is where the story takes its first big turn. The South Korean bid wasn't just about submarines. It was a massive multi-billion-dollar industrial package. A golden offer of unprecedented scale. South Korea wasn't just trying to sell a product. It was trying to sell a partnership, seeing the CPSP as a chance to elevate the entire relationship with Canada to a strategic level. Suddenly, the discussion wasn't just about torpedo tubes and battery life. It was about the future of Canadian industry. The South Korean offer included a breathtaking list of economic promises. Hanwha Ocean signed a binding Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, with Algoma Steel, Canada's largest steelmaker. This agreement, valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, included a massive investment to help build a new structural steel beam mill in Ontario, and a commitment to buy Canadian steel for the submarines and their maintenance facilities. This would anchor steel production for the entire project right here in Canada. But that was just the start. During a high-level visit to Ottawa, an agreement was signed to advance a Korean automotive manufacturing footprint in Canada. This wasn't a vague promise. It was a detailed vision for building electric vehicle plants, developing a battery production ecosystem, and cooperating on extracting Canada's critical minerals. For a Canadian auto sector that had seen production fall from over 2 million vehicles annually to around 1.2 million in 2025, this was a lifeline. The Koreans, whose automakers hold a solid 12% of the Canadian market but have no factories in the country, were offering to change that. And the list kept going. A wave of MOUs were signed with Canadian companies covering everything from AI for shipbuilding to space technology. One analysis even suggested their proposed partnerships could create an average of 15,000 jobs in Canada annually. This was the $100 billion offer, not just 12 submarines, but a complete economic integration, a vision where Canada's defense spending would be used to revitalize its manufacturing base and secure its future. It was an offer almost too good to be true. And for any other government, this is where the story would have ended. They would have signed. But the Canada of 2026 was different. It had a plan of its own. In a typical defense deal, the process is pretty straightforward. Nations compete, a winner is chosen, a contract is signed. Then, and only then, does the winning company start to deliver on its promised investments and jobs. It's a model based on trust, a promise of future benefits in exchange for a contract today. For decades, that's just how it was done, but Ottawa flipped the script. In a move that stunned the industry, the Canadian government laid down a new rule, a demand so radical it turned the whole process upside down. The message to both the South Korean and German bidders was simple and totally unprecedented. The massive industrial investments, the factories, the jobs, the whole economic package, it all had to start happening before. The submarine contract was awarded. This wasn't just a negotiation tactic. It was a fundamental shift in the power dynamic. Canada was weaponizing its own procurement process. It was no longer a hopeful buyer, happy with promises on paper. It was a strategic gatekeeper, demanding concrete, tangible proof of commitment. The new mantra was, essentially, show me the factories, show me the steel being poured, show me the jobs being created, and then, maybe we'll talk about signing a $100 billion check for your submarines. The government's own evaluation criteria made this new reality crystal clear. According to one report, a mere 20% of the bid's score was for technical capability. A full 50% was for long-term sustainment in Canada, and another 15% was for economic benefits to Canada. The message was unmistakable. The best submarine wouldn't necessarily win. The best partner would. And a good partner, in Ottawa's new book, was one willing to put its money where its mouth was, before any ink had dried. This demand sent shockwaves through the boardrooms of the bidders. It was a high-risk, high-reward gambit. For the companies, it meant committing hundreds of millions, maybe billions, in upfront investment with absolutely no guarantee of winning the final prize. It was like being asked to build a house for a client who hadn't even agreed to buy it yet. Canadian officials were blunt about it. They said the decision would come down to three things: cost, timeline, and the economic benefits to Canada. They emphasized that Ottawa wanted to start creating jobs immediately, to have the industrial infrastructure being built so it would be ready when the submarines arrived. This put the bidders in a tough spot. Do you call Canada's bluff and risk losing the biggest naval contract in a generation, or do you take the leap of faith, start pouring money into the Canadian economy, and hope that your show of commitment is enough to secure the ultimate prize? South Korea's response was immediate and aggressive. They didn't just accept the terms, they leaned into them. The flood of MOUs, the high-profile visit from a top South Korean delegation, and the specific dollar value commitments to companies like Algoma Steel were all direct answers to Canada's audacious demand. Hanwha publicly stated their partnerships were designed to align with Canada's industrial and technological benefits policy, which is explicitly meant to drive growth in Canadian industries through major defense deals. They understood the new rules of the game. Germany, not to be outdone, responded with its own proposals, but the sheer scale of the South Korean industrial offer seemed tailor-made for Canada's new strategy. This standoff, this demand for investment before contract, is the heart of the story. It represents a total transformation of defense procurement into a tool of national industrial policy. For Canada, it was an incredible gamble. If it worked, it could secure the nation's manufacturing future with a single purchase. But if it failed, if both bidders balked and walked away, Canada would be left with nothing. Its submarine fleet would continue to rust, its industrial base would continue to decline, and it would have suffered a humiliating setback on the world stage. To really grasp what's at stake in this negotiation, we have to ask a simple question. Why? Why would Canada risk a $100 billion deal by making such a crazy demand? And just as important, why on earth would an industrial powerhouse like South Korea even consider playing along? The answer lies in the converging strategic needs of two nations on opposite sides of the world, each seeing in the other a solution to its own existential problems. For the past 40 years, Canada has watched its heavy industrial base get slowly and painfully hollowed out. Once a manufacturing powerhouse, the country has seen factories close, supply chains move overseas, and its economic reliance on its powerful southern neighbor grow. The Canadian auto sector, a cornerstone of its industrial might, has seen production drop significantly from its peak of over 2 million vehicles a year. This decline isn't just an economic statistic, it's a slow-motion crisis of sovereignty. The world of the 2020s, defined by pandemic supply chain shocks and rising geopolitical tensions, laid this vulnerability bare. The just-in-time global economy suddenly looked incredibly fragile. Then came increasing trade protectionism from the U.S., forcing Ottawa to confront an uncomfortable truth. Its economic destiny was dangerously tied to forces beyond its control. Out of this crisis, a new philosophy was born. Industrial policy isn't a relic of the past. It's a crucial part of national security. The Canadian Patrol Submarine Project presented a once-in-a-generation chance to put this into practice. The government realized that the $100 billion it had to spend could do more than just buy hardware. It could be used as a massive lever to rebuild the country's industrial capacity from the ground up. This is why the demands were so specific. The push for EV and battery manufacturing wasn't random. Canada has vast reserves of critical minerals like lithium, nickel, and cobalt. By forcing a Korean industrial giant to expand its footprint in Canada, Ottawa is trying to create a fully domestic mine-to-mobility supply chain. Canada would dig the minerals, Korean tech would help turn them into batteries in Canadian factories, and those batteries would go into EVs also built in Canada. This one move could create thousands of high-tech jobs and make Canada a key player in the future of green transportation. The same logic applies to steel. The MOU with Algoma Steel wasn't just about submarines. The investment in a new beam mill would give Algoma a new product line to supply steel for infrastructure, housing, and other major projects. In essence, Ottawa's strategy is strategic reciprocity. It's telling the world, Canada has what you need. It has geographic and political stability, critical minerals, a skilled workforce, and unmatched access to the North American market. But access to Canada's market, and its defense budget, now comes with a price. You must invest here, you must build here, you must help us rebuild our industrial sovereignty. It's a calculated vision to use defense spending as a catalyst for a national industrial rebirth. But that still leaves the other half of the question. Why would South Korea, a fiercely successful nation, agree to these terms? The answer is that Seoul is playing its own game of geopolitical chess, and Canada has become a critical piece on the board. First, there's economic ambition. South Korea is already an industrial giant, but its leaders want to become a top-tier global arms exporter. Winning the CPSP would be more than just a massive sale. It would be a stamp of approval, a gateway into the exclusive club of Western defense suppliers. It would prove that Korean technology is among the best in the world. There's also a powerful logistical advantage. Hanwha Ocean has an active, highly automated production line for the KSS-3 submarine. Their shipyards are marvels of efficiency, which allows them to offer a delivery timeline competitors might struggle to match. This speed is a huge selling point for Canada's Navy, which is desperate for new boats. But the most profound reason is geopolitical. South Korea lives in a dangerous neighborhood. With an unpredictable and nuclear-armed North Korea next door, its entire industrial base is geographically concentrated and vulnerable. Shifting key parts of its supply chain to a stable, distant partner like Canada isn't just good business. It's strategic insurance. It's creating an industrial backup drive, a redundancy that protects its economic and military survival. Furthermore, a partnership with Canada gives South Korea a strategic foothold in North America and the Arctic. It diversifies its alliances and builds a deep partnership in defense, technology, and resources. This was formalized when the two countries signed the Canada-Korea Security and Defense Cooperation Partnership, a framework aimed at boosting joint military and industrial collaboration. There's even a historical and emotional layer. Canadian troops fought for South Korea's freedom during the Korean War, a fact both sides have referenced as a basis of deep trust in this negotiation. So when Canada demanded factories first, South Korea didn't see an insult. It saw an opportunity. It saw a chance to leapfrog its competitors, secure its supply chains, gain a vital strategic partner, and achieve its ambition of becoming a global defense leader, all in one move. This wasn't a surrender, it was a calculated convergence of interests. This audacious standoff has placed Canada at a historic crossroads. The outcome won't just determine the future of the Royal Canadian Navy, it will set the course for the nation's industrial strategy and its place in the world for decades. There are two clear, divergent futures that could emerge from this moment: a spectacular win-win or a catastrophic collapse. Imagine a future where the gamble pays off. South Korea, having already broken ground on new facilities and signed binding deals, is awarded the Canadian Patrol Submarine project. The contract is signed, but the revolution has already begun. In this timeline, the submarine delivery moves fast. By the mid-2030s, the Royal Canadian Navy has new, state-of-the-art KSS-3 submarines patrolling its waters. The aging Victoria class is retired, and Canada, for the first time in a generation, has a credible undersea deterrent protecting its three coasts. The Navy can seamlessly integrate with its allies and enforce its sovereignty in an increasingly contested world. But the impact on land is even more transformative. In Ontario, the new steel beam mill at Algoma Steel is running at full capacity, staffed by Canadian workers. It's not only supplying steel for the submarine program, but is winning contracts for major infrastructure projects across the country. Elsewhere, the mine-to-mobility supply chain is a reality. New EV and battery plants, backed by Korean technology, are rising in Ontario and Quebec. These factories are drawing on Canada's own critical mineral wealth, creating a secure, self-reliant ecosystem. The Canadian auto sector is reborn as a leader in clean energy transportation, with thousands of high-tech jobs created. Technology transfer agreements have revitalized Canadian shipyards. While the submarines are built in Korea, Canadian workers are now experts in their complex maintenance and overhaul, with Hanwha having transferred advanced robotic technology. This creates a sovereign sustainment capability, ensuring Canada can support its own fleet for its entire 50-year lifespan. In this future, Canada has achieved the impossible. It has used its defense budget to trigger an industrial renaissance. It has secured its supply chains, created thousands of jobs, and become a leader in key technologies. More than that, it has written a new rulebook for international procurement that other nations start to copy. Now, imagine the alternative. The demand to build the factories first proves to be a step too far. The risk is too great. South Korea and Germany both decide they cannot justify spending billions with no guaranteed contract. They politely inform Ottawa they will only commit to major investments after a contract is signed. The project grinds to a halt. The Canadian Patrol submarine project, the largest procurement in the nation's history, collapses. The immediate consequences are dire. The Royal Canadian Navy is left with its decrepit Victoria-class submarines, which become more obsolete by the day. Canada effectively loses its undersea capability entirely. Its ability to patrol the Arctic or contribute to NATO missions vanishes. The nation is left exposed, its sovereignty compromised. The economic fallout is just as bad. The promised revitalization never happens. Hopes for a new steel mill and EV factories evaporate. The jobs are lost before they even exist. Canada's industrial decline accelerates. Diplomatically, Canada is humiliated. Its audacious gambit has backfired. It's seen as naive and arrogant, a nation that overplayed its hand and lost everything. Restarting the submarine project would take years, maybe a decade. In this future, Canada's bold attempt to change the rules of the game ends not with a bang, but with a whimper. It's left with no submarines, no factories, and a hard lesson learned. The choice between these two futures now rests on the negotiations happening behind closed doors. This story is unfolding in real time, and it's one of the most significant geopolitical and economic events in recent Canadian history. It's a complex issue with massive implications, and we're committed to following every development. If you want to stay informed and understand the deeper strategies shaping our world, make sure you subscribe and enable notifications. Your support allows us to continue doing this kind of in-depth analysis. The standoff over Canada's next-generation submarine fleet is so much more than a story about military hardware. It's a story about a nation trying to redefine its place in the 21st century global order. For decades, the flow of power in these mega-deals was predictable. The nation with the technology held all the cards. Canada's audacious demand has tried to flip that, arguing that in a world of growing instability, things like geographic security, political stability, and critical resources are a form of leverage all their own. By turning a defense procurement into a national industrial strategy, Ottawa has made a bet of historic proportions. It has tied the security of its coastlines to the future of its factories. The government is betting that the $100 billion taxpayer dollars it must spend to defend the country can also be used to build a more resilient and prosperous future at home. South Korea's enthusiastic response, driven by its own strategic needs, shows that this new model might just work. They aren't just selling submarines, they are buying strategic depth, supply chain security, and a powerful new ally. The result is a negotiation that looks less like a simple transaction and more like the foundation of a partnership that could benefit both nations for the next 50 years. But the risks are still immense. If the deal collapses under the weight of its own ambition, it will be a generational setback for Canada's military and its economy. The line between a bold vision and a costly failure is razor thin. What this moment truly represents is a potential shift in the rules of global power. We are witnessing a nation that is no longer content to be a passive consumer, but one that is actively using its purchasing power to shape its own destiny. The final question is this: is Canada writing the new rulebook, or is it about to learn a very painful lesson in the limits of its own leverage?